My name is Ada Morgan, and I'm 58 years old. For the past 30 years, I've built a successful real estate business from nothing, creating a life I never thought possible for my daughter Sarah and myself. Sarah is 29 now, the light of my life, and she's always been my greatest accomplishment. When she told me she was getting married to Brandon, I felt that familiar mix of joy and worry every mother knows. I wanted her to be happy, but something deep in my gut told me this wedding was going to change everything between us forever. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, because what I'm about to share with you will leave you absolutely speechless about how quickly a dream wedding can become a nightmare. Let me take you back to understand how we got here. When Sarah was just 5 years old, her father David walked out on us without warning. He left behind a mountain of debt and a broken little girl who kept asking when Daddy was coming home. I made a promise that night that I would never let anyone make my daughter feel abandoned again. I started with nothing but determination and a small loan. I began by flipping houses in rundown neighbourhoods, working 16-hour days, while Sarah stayed with my neighbour, Mrs. Patterson. Every scraped knee, every school play, every sleepless night when she had the flu, it was just the two of us against the world. But we made it work. By the time Sarah graduated high school, I owned 12 rental properties and had started my own real estate development company. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. Sarah saw every sacrifice I made, every late night I spent reviewing contracts, every weekend I worked instead of resting. She understood the value of hard work because she lived it with me. Sarah grew up to be everything I hoped she would be. Smart, kind, independent, and grateful for the life we built together. She went to college, got her degree in marketing, and started her own small business. We were best friends, talking every day, sharing everything. I was so proud of the woman she had become. Then she met Brandon Williams at a networking event 2 years ago. He was 32, worked in finance, and had that polished look that comes from never having to worry about money. When Sarah first brought him home, I tried to be welcoming. He was handsome, well-spoken, and seemed to make Sarah happy, but something about his smile never quite reached his eyes. Brandon came from what he called old money. His parents, Robert and Patricia Williams, owned a chain of high-end boutiques that had been in their family for generations. From our first meeting, I could sense their disapproval of me. They spoke in carefully measured tones about family traditions and proper breeding, words that felt like tiny cuts every time they left their lips. I watched my daughter slowly change during their relationship. Sarah, who used to call me 3 times a day, started returning my calls hours later. She began using words like appropriate and refined when talking about simple things. When I suggested we go to our favourite diner for lunch, she would suggest somewhere more suitable instead. The warning signs were there from the beginning, but I ignored them because I saw how happy Sarah seemed. At least I thought she was happy. Looking back now, I realize what I was seeing was her desperate attempt to fit into a world that had already decided she didn't belong. The proposal happened on a Tuesday evening at Les Bernardins, one of the most expensive restaurants in the city. I only found out about it when Sarah called me 3 hours later, her voice shaking with excitement. She hadn't invited me to witness the moment because, as she explained, Brandon wanted it to be intimate and private. I felt the first sharp sting of exclusion that night, but I pushed it down. This was supposed to be one of the happiest moments of my daughter's life, and I wasn't going to let my hurt feelings overshadow her joy. When she asked me to meet them the next day to discuss wedding plans, I thought things would return to normal. I was wrong. The meeting took place at the Williams family estate, a sprawling colonial mansion in Connecticut that screamed generational wealth. Patricia greeted me at the door, wearing pearls and a smile that never touched her eyes. Robert stood behind her, looking like he was greeting an unwelcome salesperson rather than his future daughter-in-law's mother. Ada, Patricia said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. How lovely that you could make time for this little gathering. Little gathering, as if discussing my only daughter's wedding was just a casual afterthought in my busy schedule. We sat in their formal living room, surrounded by family portraits dating back centuries. Brandon and Sarah sat together on an antique love seat, while I was directed to a chair that faced them, like I was there for an interview. The Williams parents flanked them like sentries protecting a fortress. "We've been discussing the wedding arrangements," Robert began, "and we feel that something truly spectacular is in order." Brandon leaned forward, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We're thinking Rosewood Manor for the venue. 500 guests, full orchestra, premium everything. We want this to be the social event of the season." My heart sank as I calculated the numbers in my head. Rosewood Manor was one of the most exclusive venues in the state. I knew because I had tried to book it for a client once and nearly choked on the price. We were talking about at least $500,000 for the kind of wedding they were describing. "That sounds wonderful," I said carefully, "but perhaps we should discuss the budget first." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances that spoke volumes about their opinion of discussing money so directly. "Cost isn't really a concern," Patricia said with a dismissive wave. "We believe in doing things properly regardless of the expense." I looked at Sarah, waiting for her to mention that I would be paying for the wedding as we had discussed months earlier. But she just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, saying nothing. "Of course," I replied slowly, "I'll be happy to cover the expenses for Sarah's special day." Brandon's face lit up like Christmas morning. "That's incredibly generous of you, Ada. We were hoping you'd feel that way." The relief in his voice told me everything I needed to know about their financial situation, but I pushed that thought aside. This was for Sarah. Everything I did was always for Sarah. Over the next hour, they outlined their vision in detail. Crystal chandeliers, imported flowers, a 7-course dinner prepared by a Michelin-starred chef. Every element was designed to impress their social circle and announce their arrival as a power couple. I agreed to everything because I saw the excitement in Sarah's eyes. When she looked at those wedding magazines and talked about her dream day, she glowed with happiness. If spending $500,000 could give my daughter that joy, then I would find a way to make it happen. What I didn't realize was that I had just signed up to fund my own exclusion from the very event I was paying for. The next few months were a masterclass in sophisticated manipulation. Every decision about the wedding involved multiple meetings that I somehow never received invitations to. When I asked Sarah about dress shopping, she told me they had already chosen the boutique and set the appointments. "Brandon's mother has such exquisite taste," Sarah explained over coffee one afternoon. "She's been planning society weddings for decades. She knows exactly what works and what doesn't." What doesn't work, apparently, was including the mother of the bride in any meaningful way. Patricia had opinions about everything, and her opinions carried more weight than mine, despite the fact that my checkbook was funding every detail. When I suggested photographers I had worked with in my business, Patricia politely explained that they weren't quite right for this caliber of event. When I offered to help with the floral arrangements, I was told they had already contracted with a designer who understood their vision. I felt like a walking ATM necessary for funding, but not worthy of actual participation. The worst part was watching Sarah transform before my eyes. She started speaking differently, using phrases like, "one simply doesn't," and "it's just not done." She criticized restaurants we used to love together, calling them too casual, or not quite our scene anymore. During one particularly painful conversation, I mentioned our tradition of having lunch at Murphy's Deli every month, the place where we had celebrated every achievement in her life since she was 12. "Mum," she sighed, "we really need to find somewhere more appropriate. Brandon and I can't be seen eating at places like that anymore. People notice these things." People. As if our 24-year tradition meant nothing compared to impressing strangers who judged her based on where she ate lunch. I started to recognize the signs of emotional manipulation that I had learned about during my own difficult marriage. Brandon had a way of making subtle suggestions that Sarah treated like commandments. He never directly criticized me, but he had a talent for asking questions that planted seeds of doubt. Don't you think your mother might be more comfortable with a smaller, more intimate celebration? He would ask Sarah when I suggested inviting my longtime friends. I just want her to feel at ease. Of course, what he really wanted was for my friends to not attend at all, because they didn't meet his social standards. I tried to address this during a family dinner at Sarah's apartment. When I brought up feeling excluded from the planning process, Brandon was ready with smooth explanations. "Ada, we absolutely value your input," he said with that practiced smile. "It's just that wedding planning can be overwhelming when too many people are involved. We're trying to streamline the process to make it less stressful for everyone. Less stressful for everyone except the person paying for everything." Sarah nodded along with his explanation, but I caught glimpses of the daughter I raised in her eyes. Sometimes when Brandon was speaking, I would see her expression flicker with uncertainty, like she was hearing her own thoughts for the first time in months. I began to investigate Brandon's family more thoroughly. My years in real estate had taught me how to research property records, business filings, and financial histories. What I discovered confirmed my suspicions. The Williams family boutiques were hemorrhaging money. They had mortgaged their estate twice in the past 5 years and were behind on several business loans. They weren't old money at all. They were drowning debt disguised as dynasty. But every time I tried to share my concerns with Sarah, she accused me of being jealous or controlling. The wedge between us grew wider with each conversation until we were barely speaking except about wedding logistics and payment schedules. 1 week before the wedding, I received a call from Sarah asking me to come over to finalize the last-minute details. I was relieved because we hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, and I was hoping we could repair some of the damage that had been done to our relationship. When I arrived at her apartment, I found Brandon and his parents already there, huddled around Sarah's dining table with what looked like seating charts and guest lists spread across the surface. They looked up when I entered, and I caught something in their expressions that made my stomach clench. "Mum, perfect timing," Sarah said, but her voice sounded strained. "We were just discussing the final arrangements." I sat down at the table, noticing immediately that there was no chair pulled out for me. I had to get one from the kitchen myself, while they continued their conversation as if I wasn't there. Patricia was holding a list of names, making check marks with a gold-plated pen. "Now we've confirmed the Ashworths and the Pemberton family. Senator Richardson will be attending with his wife, and the Vanderbilt cousins have RSVP'd as well." These were names I had never heard before, people who apparently mattered more than the friends and family members who had been part of Sarah's life since childhood. "What about the seating arrangements for my side of the family?" I asked, looking at the charts scattered across the table. Robert cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well, that's actually what we needed to discuss with you." Brandon leaned back in his chair, that familiar smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Ada, we've been thinking about the guest list, and we've realized we need to make some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" Patricia set down her pen and fixed me with a look that was equal parts condescending and apologetic. "You see, dear, this wedding is going to be attended by some very important people. Business associates, political figures, social influencers. The guest list has become quite exclusive." My heart started pounding as I began to understand where this conversation was heading. Brandon continued where Patricia left off. "The thing is, some people might not be comfortable in this kind of environment. It's going to be very formal, very traditional. We wouldn't want anyone to feel out of place." "Who exactly are we talking about?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your friends from the real estate business," Sarah said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "And some of your family members. Brandon thinks they might not enjoy themselves at such a formal event." I stared at my daughter, searching for any sign of the woman I had raised. Sarah, these are people who have been part of your life since you were born. Uncle Tommy, who taught you to ride a bike. Mrs. Patterson, who watched you every day after school. Jenny Martinez, who threw you that surprise graduation party. Brandon waved his hand dismissively. I'm sure they're lovely people, but this isn't really their scene. We're talking about a $500,000 wedding here. The guest list needs to reflect the caliber of the event. The words hung in the air like poison. I felt something cold and sharp settling in my chest as I realized what was happening. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, I said slowly. You want to exclude my family and friends from the wedding that I'm paying for? Patricia laughed, a tinkling sound that made my skin crawl. Oh, Ada, it's not about exclusion, it's about creating the right atmosphere. This is going to be featured in several magazines. We need to be mindful of the image we're presenting. That's when Brandon delivered the final blow. Only important people are invited, he said, with that same practiced smile. I'm sure you understand. The room went silent except for the ticking of Sarah's grandmother's clock on the mantelpiece. I looked around the table at these people who had just told me that everyone I cared about wasn't important enough to witness my daughter's wedding. And where exactly do I fit into this important people category? I asked. Brandon's smile faltered for just a moment before returning full force. Well, you're Sarah's mother, of course, but we were thinking you might be more comfortable joining us after the ceremony itself. You know, for the reception portion, less formal, more relaxed. I felt like I had been slapped across the face with a brick. You want me to skip my own daughter's wedding ceremony? It's not that we don't want you there, Sarah said quickly, finally looking at me. It's just that the ceremony is going to be very traditional, very formal. Brandon's family has specific customs and traditions that need to be observed. Patricia nodded sagely. It's really for the best, dear. These society weddings can be quite overwhelming for people who aren't accustomed to them. We wouldn't want you to feel uncomfortable or out of place. I looked directly at Sarah, ignoring everyone else in the room. Do you agree with this? My daughter, the woman I had sacrificed everything for the child I had protected and provided for and loved unconditionally for 29 years, looked me in the eye and said, I think it might be easier for everyone if we do it this way. Brandon leaned forward, his voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my blood boil. Look, Ada, I appreciate everything you've done financially for this wedding. I really do. But money doesn't buy class or breeding or the ability to fit into certain social circles. Brandon, Sarah said weakly, but she didn't tell him to stop. He continued, emboldened by her lack of protest. This wedding is about more than just Sarah and me getting married. It's about our future, our social standing, our business connections. We can't afford to have the wrong people there sending the wrong message. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking with rage and heartbreak. The wrong people? You mean people like me? I didn't say that, Brandon replied, though his smirk suggested otherwise. You didn't have to. I looked one more time at Sarah, hoping to see some sign that she would stand up for me, defend me, remember everything we had been through together. Instead, she stared at her hands folded in her lap. Sarah. I said her name like a question, like a plea. She looked up at me with tears in her eyes. Mum, you always make everything so difficult. Why can't you just try to understand what's best for everyone? That was the moment my heart completely shattered. My own daughter had just told me that wanting to attend her wedding was making things difficult. I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door, my entire body trembling with emotions I couldn't even name. Ada, wait, Patricia called after me. Let's discuss this like reasonable adults. I turned back one last time. You know what? You're absolutely right. Money doesn't buy class. If it did, you people would be bankrupt in that department too. I left them sitting there in stunned silence, my footsteps echoing in the hallway, as I walked away from the daughter I thought I knew and the wedding I had been fool enough to fund. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier, staring at the stack of wedding contracts and receipts that covered my dining table. Every paper represented a piece of my heart and a chunk of my savings that I had willingly given to make my daughter's dreams come true. But as I sat there in the quiet darkness of my house, I began to see those contracts with new eyes. Every single one was signed with my name. Every payment had come from my accounts. Every vendor, every service provider, every detail of that $500,000 wedding was legally tied to me. By sunrise, I had made my decision. I called my lawyer, Margaret Chen, at 7 in the morning. Margaret had been handling my business contracts for 15 years, and she had never seen me this focused or determined about anything. I need you to review all of these wedding contracts immediately, I told her. I want to know exactly what my legal obligations are and what my options are for cancellation. Margaret arrived at my house 2 hours later with her legal team. We spread every document across my dining room table and went through them line by line. The news was better than I had hoped. "Ada," Margaret said, looking up from a thick stack of papers, "you have cancellation clauses in almost every one of these contracts. Most vendors require 72 hours notice, but you're well within that time frame." I felt something shift inside my chest, like a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying suddenly lifting. My first call was to James Morrison, the owner of Rosewood Manor. James and I had done business before, when I had helped him purchase additional properties for his hospitality group. He answered on the second ring. "Ada, how wonderful to hear from you. I trust everything is set for Saturday's celebration." "Actually, James, that's why I'm calling. I need to cancel the event." There was a pause. "Cancel? But Ada, this is Wednesday. The wedding is in 3 days." "I understand the timing isn't ideal, but I'm invoking the cancellation clause in our contract. I'll forfeit the deposit, of course, but I need to cancel all services immediately." James was professional about it, though. I could hear the confusion in his voice. "Of course, Ada. I'll have my team contact you about the details. May I ask if everything is all right?" "Everything is going to be just fine," I said, and for the first time in months, I meant it. Next, I called Adrienne Bouchard, the florist, who had been commissioned to create $20,000 worth of arrangements. Adrienne had built her reputation on high-end society weddings, and she was not pleased about the last-minute cancellation. "This is highly irregular," she said stiffly. "My reputation depends on consistency and reliability." "I completely understand, Adrienne, and I apologize for any inconvenience. I'll pay the full cancellation fee as outlined in our contract." One by one, I worked through the list. The catering company that had planned a 7-course menu featuring lobster and Wagyu beef. The string quartet that had been flown in from Vienna, the photographer who specialized in high society events, the bakery that had been crafting a 5-tier cake decorated with sugar flowers that took 3 weeks to create. Each conversation was professional, but increasingly surreal. These people had been planning this event for months, coordinating schedules and ordering supplies and preparing for what they thought would be the social event of the season. By noon, I had cancelled everything, every flower, every note of music, every bite of food, every photograph that would have captured Brandon and Sarah's perfect day. Gone. The financial cost was significant but manageable. Between cancellation fees and forfeited deposits, I was out about $50,000. But considering I had been prepared to spend 10 times that amount, it felt like a bargain. My bank account, which had been systematically drained over the past 6 months to fund wedding expenses, was suddenly healthy again. The money I had transferred to a special wedding account was transferred back to my primary savings. The credit lines I had opened for major deposits were paid off and closed. With each transaction, I felt more and more like myself again, the woman who had built a business from nothing, who had raised a daughter alone, who had never let anyone treat her with disrespect until she made the mistake of thinking love meant accepting unacceptable behaviour. As I made my final call of the day, cancelling the luxury car service that was supposed to transport the wedding party, my phone started ringing. It was Sarah. I let it go to voicemail, then Brandon called, voicemail, then Patricia, voicemail, then Sarah again and again and again. I turned my phone off and poured myself a glass of wine. For the first time in months, I felt peace. Thursday morning brought chaos. I turned my phone back on to find 37 missed calls and 22 voicemails. The first few messages were confused inquiries from Sarah asking me to call her back. The later messages were increasingly panicked as word spread through their social circle that Saturday's wedding had been cancelled. By the time I finished listening to all the voicemails, there was pounding on my front door. I looked through the peephole to see Brandon standing on my porch, his face red with rage, with Robert and Patricia flanked behind him like an angry mob. Sarah was there too, but she hung back, looking small and frightened. I opened the door, but kept the chain lock engaged. "What did you do?" Brandon shouted, before I could say a word. "The venue called us this morning. The caterers, the florists, everyone is cancelling. What did you do?" "I exercised my legal rights under the contracts I signed and paid for," I said calmly. Robert stepped forward, his face purple with indignation. "This is preposterous. You can't just cancel a wedding 3 days before the ceremony." "Actually, I can. And I did." Patricia was practically vibrating with fury. "Do you have any idea who was supposed to attend this wedding? Senator Richardson, the Vanderbilt family, some of the most influential people in the state. They're already travelling here. The humiliation is beyond comprehension." I looked past them to Sarah, who was crying silently. "Sarah, do you have something you want to say to me?" She stepped forward, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, please, we can fix this. We can talk about the guest list. We can include your friends. We can work everything out." "Can we?" I asked. "Because yesterday you told me I was making things difficult by wanting to attend my own daughter's wedding." Brandon pushed past Sarah, his composure completely gone. "You're destroying her life because your feelings got hurt. This is about revenge, plain and simple." "No," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "This is about self-respect, something you clearly know nothing about." "You have no right to do this," he snarled. "We'll sue you for breach of contract, for emotional distress, for everything we can think of." I almost laughed. "Sue me with what money? I know about your family's financial situation, Brandon. I know about the mortgages on your parents' house, the failing boutiques, the mounting debt. You were counting on this wedding to open doors for you, weren't you? All those important people you were so worried about impressing. They were potential business connections, not friends." The colour drained from Brandon's face. Patricia gasped audibly. "You were willing to sacrifice my relationship with my daughter to fund your social climbing expedition," I continued. "Well, congratulations. You've succeeded in destroying my relationship with Sarah, but you're not going to do it on my dime." Robert tried to regain control of the situation. "Now see here, we can come to some arrangement. Perhaps we can find a way to reinstate the contracts." "For what? So you can continue to treat me like a walking ATM while excluding me from every meaningful moment of my daughter's wedding." Patricia stepped forward, with that fake smile plastered on her face. "Ada, dear, I think there may have been some misunderstandings yesterday. Perhaps we were a bit hasty in our suggestions about the guest list." "There was no misunderstanding," I said firmly. "You made it very clear that my friends and family weren't important enough to attend. You made it very clear that I wasn't important enough to attend my own daughter's wedding ceremony." Sarah finally found her voice. "Mom, that's not what we meant." "Isn't it? Then tell me, Sarah, what did you mean when you said I always make everything difficult? What did you mean when you agreed that it would be easier for everyone if I skipped your wedding ceremony?" She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Brandon, desperate now, tried a different approach. "Look, I may have spoken out of turn yesterday. These society events can be stressful, and perhaps I wasn't as diplomatic as I should have been. But cancelling everything 3 days before the wedding is an extreme overreaction. Extreme overreaction, I repeated. You told me that only important people were invited to an event I was funding, then suggested I wasn't important enough to attend the ceremony. What exactly would be an appropriate reaction to that? The truth was finally coming out, and I could see the reality of the situation dawning on Sarah's face. As she listened to our conversation, Patricia made one last, desperate attempt. We could have a lovely ceremony with a more intimate guest list, something smaller, more family-focused. You mean something you could afford without my help? The silence that followed answered my question perfectly. The wedding is cancelled, I said firmly. All of it. Every flower, every song, every bite of food. If you want to get married on Saturday, you'll have to find another way to do it. I started to close the door, but Sarah reached out to stop me. Mum, please don't do this. I love him. I want to marry him. I looked at my daughter, this woman I had raised to be strong and independent, who was now begging me to fund her own humiliation. Then marry him, Sarah, but marry him with your eyes open. Marry him knowing that he was willing to exclude your mother from your wedding to impress strangers. Marry him knowing that his family's fortune is built on debt and appearances. Marry him knowing that the moment you stop being useful to his social climbing ambitions, you'll be the next person he decides isn't important enough. With that, I closed the door and engaged all the locks. They stood on my porch for another 10 minutes, arguing among themselves in voices I could hear through the door. Eventually they left, but I could hear Brandon shouting something about lawyers and lawsuits as they walked to their car. I didn't care. For the first time in months, I felt like Ada Morgan again. The woman who didn't take disrespect from anyone who had built something from nothing, who had raised a daughter to know her own worth. Even if that daughter had temporarily forgotten the lesson. The next 24 hours were the strangest of my life. My phone rang constantly with calls from vendors confirming cancellations, relatives asking what had happened, and friends who had heard rumours that something was wrong. Sarah called me every hour on Friday, each message more desperate than the last. She begged me to reconsider, promised things would be different, swore that Brandon had learned his lesson and would treat me with respect. But it was too late for promises and apologies. The damage had been done, and more importantly, the truth had been revealed. Friday evening, my doorbell rang. I looked through the peephole expecting to see another confrontation with Brandon and his family, but instead, I saw Sarah standing alone on my porch. She looked exhausted, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I opened the door without the chain lock this time. "Can I come in?" she asked quietly. I stepped aside and let her enter. We sat in my living room, the same room where she used to do homework while I worked on real estate contracts, where we used to watch movies on Friday nights, where we used to plan her future before Brandon Williams entered our lives. "The wedding is really cancelled," she said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Brandon is furious. His family is humiliated. They keep calling me, screaming about lawsuits and damages and how this is all my fault for not controlling you better. I winced at the phrase controlling you better, but said nothing. Sarah continued. "We tried to find another venue for tomorrow, but everything decent is booked months in advance. Brandon suggested we just go to City Hall and have a small ceremony, but his parents are horrified by the idea. They say it would be social suicide after all the publicity about the big wedding. What do you want to do?" I asked. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. When she finally looked up at me, I saw my daughter clearly for the first time in months. "I don't know," she whispered. "I thought I knew, but after everything that's happened, after the things they said about you, about our family, about our friends, I don't know anymore. Tell me what you're thinking." "I keep remembering things," she said slowly. The way Brandon would suggest that my friends weren't sophisticated enough. The way his mother would make little comments about my clothes or my job or the way I talked. I thought they were helping me become better, but now I wonder if they were just trying to make me ashamed of who I was. I reached over and took her hand. You were never anything to be ashamed of, Sarah. You were perfect exactly as you were. She started crying, then deep sobs that shook her whole body. I'm so sorry, Mum. I'm so sorry for what I said to you, for how I let them treat you, for forgetting everything you did for me. I moved to the couch beside her and pulled her into my arms the way I had when she was little, and the world seemed too big and scary to handle alone. You were in love, I said softly. Love makes us do foolish things sometimes. It makes us forget who we are and what we're worth. But you raised me better than that. You taught me to stand up for myself and for the people I love. And when it mattered most, I failed you completely. We sat there crying together as the sun set outside my window. My heart was breaking for my daughter's pain, but it was also healing from the relief of having her back. What happens now? She asked, eventually. That's up to you. Do you still want to marry Brandon? She was quiet for a long time. I thought I did. But after seeing how he reacted when things didn't go his way, after hearing the things he said about you and our life, I don't think I know who he really is anymore. Then maybe you have your answer. Saturday morning, Sarah called off the engagement. She returned Brandon's ring and told him she needed time to think about what she really wanted from life. Brandon's reaction was exactly what I had expected. He called her ungrateful, accused her of being manipulated by me, and threatened to tell everyone in their social circle that she had abandoned him at the altar. Let him, Sarah said when she told me about the conversation. Anyone who would judge me based on his version of events isn't someone I want in my life anyway. The Williams family's reaction was swift and predictable. Patricia called me personally to inform me that I had destroyed a young man's life and reputation and that they would never forget this betrayal. I told her I hoped that was true because I certainly wouldn't forget their betrayal either. But the most satisfying call came from Brandon himself, who spent 15 minutes screaming at me about ruining his life and costing him valuable social connections. When he finally stopped to breathe, I said very calmly, "Brandon, I didn't ruin your life. I just stopped funding it." Then I hung up and blocked his number. 6 months later, Sarah and I were sitting on a beach in Tuscany, watching the sunset over the Mediterranean Sea. We had been travelling together for 3 weeks, the first real vacation either of us had taken in years. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked me, as we sipped wine and watched the waves roll in. "Regret what?" "Cancelling the wedding. Costing yourself all that money, dealing with all the drama and accusations." I thought about it for a moment. The only thing I regret is that it took me so long to do it. I should have stood up to them the first time they disrespected me instead of letting it escalate for months. Sarah smiled, the first completely genuine smile I had seen from her since before she started dating Brandon. "I'm glad you did it when you did. If you hadn't, I might have married him and spent years trying to be someone I'm not." "What do you think you'll do when we get back home?" "I've been thinking about that a lot," she said. "I want to focus on my business for a while. I want to remember who I was before I started trying to be who I thought everyone else wanted me to be. And dating. Eventually. But next time, I'm going to trust my instincts. And I'm definitely going to pay attention to how any potential partner treats the people I love." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun disappear into the horizon. The peace I felt in that moment was worth every penny of the cancelled wedding, every hour of drama and confrontation, every sleepless night I had spent wondering if I was doing the right thing. "You know what the funny thing is?" Sarah said suddenly. "What's that? I actually feel sorry for Brandon now. Not because I cancelled the wedding, but because he'll probably spend his whole life trying to buy his way into social circles that will never really accept him. He'll always be performing, always trying to prove he belongs somewhere. And what about you? Where do you belong?" She looked at me with eyes that were clear and confident for the first time in over a year, right here, with the people who love me for who I am, not for what I can do for them. As we packed up our things to head back to the hotel, I thought about all the lessons this experience had taught me. About the importance of setting boundaries, even with people you love. About the difference between supporting someone's dreams and funding your own disrespect. About the courage it takes to walk away from something you've invested in when that investment stops serving you. Most importantly, I learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone you love is showing them they deserve better treatment than they're accepting, even if that means you have to be willing to lose them in order to save them. Sarah had thanked me dozens of times over the past few months for saving her from making the biggest mistake of her life. But the truth was, she had saved herself. I just stopped enabling a situation that was destroying both of us. The wedding that never happened became the foundation for rebuilding a relationship that was stronger and more honest than ever before. And while I wouldn't recommend my methods to every parent facing similar circumstances, I knew I had made the right choice for us. Because sometimes love means being willing to disappoint someone in order to protect them. Sometimes it means saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. And sometimes it means cancelling a $500,000 wedding to save something worth much more than money. Sometimes it means teaching the people you love that they are worthy of respect even when they have forgotten that lesson themselves. In the end, the most important people were invited to our celebration after all. They were the people who showed up not because of social obligation or potential business connections, but because they genuinely cared about our happiness and well-being. They were the people who had been there all along, waiting patiently while we learned the difference between love and manipulation, between family and social climbing, between what we thought we wanted and what we actually needed. And that celebration, impromptu and unplanned as it was, cost nothing but meant everything. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for your values? What did you do and how did it turn out? Share your experiences in the comments, because I believe we all learn from each other's stories. If this story resonated with you in any way, please give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, because sharing these real-life experiences helps all of us navigate the complicated relationships in our own lives. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve to be treated with respect, no matter how much they've invested in a relationship or situation. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that your worth is never determined by other people's opinions of your importance. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with your dignity intact, even when it costs you everything else.